Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Donald Trump and Cyril Ramaphosa are finally going to have a meeting next week, Wednesday. It's going to be one of the biggest meetings of the year, definitely on the South African political calendar. And there's a lot at stake for both countries. And there's a lot that has been happening. If you've been following the news, you know that it has been drama after drama, fiasco after fiasco, hullabaloo after hullabaloo as a result of the dynamics between Donald Trump, South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, Elon Musk. All of these actors have led to this moment. Questions that arise, critical questions that arise. Number one, is this meeting necessary? Is it necessary for President Cyril Ramaphosa to meet with President Donald Trump? Number two, is this meeting a good diplomatic strategy? There's a lot that could go wrong for President Ramaphosa, for South Africa. We saw what happened with Zelenskyy. So we know that this meeting is happening because it has been mentioned by Donald Trump and it has been confirmed by a statement from the president of South Africa himself. So this is what the presidency issued as a statement late last night. This is what they say. President Ramaphosa to undertake a working visit to the United States of America. President Cyril Ramaphosa will embark on a working visit to the United States of America from the 19th to the 22nd of May, 2025. On Wednesday, the 21st of May, President Ramaphosa will meet with President Donald Trump at the White House in Washington, D.C. to discuss bilateral, regional, and global issues of interest. The president's visit to the United States provides a platform to reset the strategic relationship between the two countries, issued by the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa. The context of these meetings is one where there's been tension between the two countries on a variety of fronts and where the stakes are high, extremely high for South African businesses and also for American businesses. Let's start with the American stuff. What are the American interests in South Africa? You may think America is so big, they don't have any interest in South Africa. You'd be wrong. They have commercial interests, they have resource-based interests, and they have geopolitical interests. The USA has basically got three goals when it comes to their interactions with South Africa. Number one, to prevent China from getting a naval base in Simonstown. Significant geopolitical military goal because China wants that base. They want to prevent that. Number two, to protect U.S. investments in South Africa and to get more. South Africa has more U.S. business activity than any other African nation. There are over 600 American companies operating in South Africa. Right? For instance, the investment bank Goldman Sachs has an operating and banking license in South Africa. One businessman in particular who wants to have a slice of business in South Africa is Elon Musk, who wants to start or have Starlink operate officially and legally in South Africa. He doesn't want to do a BE deal, though. He doesn't want to provide any local ownership. Right now, the regulations stipulate that there must be 30% local ownership to participate in the telecommunications industry. There's a dispute about whether 30% is too high, but typically what companies do is that they have a local version of the company which owns a small part of the global company, and then that local version is then given the 30%. So it's not necessarily that if he does launch Starlink in South Africa, that therefore means that then the local owners will then own 30% of his global company. That's not how it works. That's not how other companies have done it. Vodacom, you name it. All of these companies that are operating in South Africa have done versions of BE deals which don't necessarily create 30% ownership of the mother company. That's not how it works. But Elon Musk has been one of the people constructing or pushing the narrative about South Africa, somebody who has been saying that he's been denied from being able to operate his business in South Africa because he's not a black South African. And that's part of the consideration. Businesses want in on South Africa. South Africa is a very valuable market. Despite what people may say often and trying to denigrate this space, South Africa is a valuable market with a significant amount of value. The banking sector is 19th in the world. The insurance sector is second in the world. And there are many high worth income individuals who are worth doing business in South Africa. That's why you'll have more American businesses, more European businesses in South Africa than you'll find in other parts of Africa. Number 3, South Africa has a large mining sector, and America does not want to lose out on access to all of those minerals. They don't want those minerals exclusively going to China, which they consider to be their rival. The other thing is that you have to be aware in terms of the goals of America is that they actually prefer the GNU, the coalition between the Democratic Alliance and the ANC. And the Democratic Alliance goes to the US and spends a lot of money lobbying in the US. So they're familiar with them. They would prefer for them to remain in power. And they view this particular formulation as being a better option than an ANC, Economic Freedom Fighters, and Mkhonto we Sizwe combination, which they view will take a harder position on America, a harder position on the geopolitical dynamics in Africa, and will embrace Russia and China much further than what the current administration is doing. So the goals of America: prevent China getting a base, expand business interests, hook Elon up. Elon is a big player in Trump's world, and as well to keep the coalition that is currently in existence, right? However, as you know, there's been a diplomatic, crinkum-crankum between the USA and South Africa. And this has been happening from the very beginning of Trump 2.0. Here's the timeline. On January the 20th, on the first day of his second term, Donald Trump was signing executive orders like a man on fire. On that day, Trump issued an executive order called Realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. That particular order suspended the U.S. refugee admissions program indefinitely, and it had the effect of canceling more than 10,000 scheduled refugee flights from around the world and stranding at least 22,000 approved refugees, including people from Afghanistan and families of U.S. military personnel who were granted that refugee status. That's going to matter later. On the same day, January the 20th, 2025, Donald Trump also signed the executive order which ended the U.S. aid program. He signed the Reevaluating and Realigning United States Foreign Aid executive order. This affected funding for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, which is known as PEPFAR, which accounted for about 20% of South Africa's HIV and AIDS budget. In 2024 alone, the USA provided approximately $8.5 billion to South Africa under PEPFAR, with a projected $8.2 billion for 2025. The suspension and subsequent cancellation of much of this funding basically did affect the provision of healthcare to people who are living with HIV in South Africa. So those things happened on the 20th, day one of Trump 2.0. 3 days later, right, on the 23rd of January, President Cyril Ramaphosa signed the Expropriation Act, which allows for, under certain circumstances, limited circumstances, the expropriation of land without compensation. However, the act is very clear. Most instances will be with compensation. In the instances where there is no compensation, it is more for land in areas where the land has not been developed for a protracted period of time, and also where the buildings have been hijacked. It doesn't deal with commercial farms. It doesn't deal with farmers. It doesn't deal with any of those instances. The system is a law-based system. It's not Zimbabwe. It's nothing like that. And one thing about the South African judiciary and the court system that everyone has spoken about, they've praised it. It has been able to hold presidents to account. It has been able to hold powerful politicians to account. There's no criticism whatsoever about the integrity of the judiciary on the global stage. So the idea that this particular Expropriation Act is any version of Zimbabwe is false. This is similar to other laws which exist in other parts of the world, such as eminent domain in America, where they can come and say, hey, we want to build a highway over here. We're going to take this particular land. It's no different. It's actually modeled around those particular pieces of legislation. Important to say. But that being passed caused a lot of commotion. And what we then saw much later, or not actually much later, soon after, 13 days after that happened, on the 2nd of January, Donald Trump went onto social media and started attacking South Africa. The next day, there was a phone call between the president of South Africa and Elon Musk. He was trying to sort things out. That was organized by Benjani Chauke and Elon's father. Then 20 days later, Donald Trump signed the executive order, which was titled Addressing Egregious Actions of the Republic of South Africa. That order stated that it would provide for refugee resettlement and other considerations. What it said is that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Homeland Security shall take appropriate steps consistent with law to prioritize humanitarian relief, including admission and resettlement through the United States Refugee Admissions Program for Afrikaners in South Africa who are victims of unjust racial discrimination. This week, 115 days later, we're at the point where the first group actually left and went to America. And Trump was asked about this particular arrival of the Afrikaner refugees, and he was very scathing in his comments about South Africa. This is what he had to say.
I want to ask you about South African refugees. Dozens of Afrikaners who claim discrimination in their own country are heading to the United States, where our administration is going to welcome them as refugees. Now, this comes as you've halted virtually all refugee missions or people from the famine and the war from countries like Sudan, the Democratic Republic of Congo. Why are you creating an expedited path into the country for Afrikaners?
Because they're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed. Now, South Africa leadership is coming to see me, I understand, sometime next week. And, we're supposed to have I guess a G20 meeting there or something, but we're having a G20 meeting. I don't know how we can go unless that situation's taken care of, but it's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about, but it's a terrible thing that's taking place. And farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me, but white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa. And the newspapers and the media, television media, doesn't even talk about it. If it were the other way around, they'd talk about it. That would be the only story they'd talk about. And I don't care who they are. I don't care about their race, their color. I don't care about their height, their weight. I don't care about anything. I just know that what's happening is terrible. I have people that live in South Africa. They say it's a terrible situation taking place. So we've essentially extended citizenship to those people to escape from that violence and come here. Yeah.
Mr. President.
So Trump is clearly hostile. In addition to all of this, 4 U.S. congressmen have asked President Donald Trump to revoke South Africa's access to the U.S. market through the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA, as well as to consider breaking diplomatic relations. And they've accused South Africa of undermining American interests globally. In a letter dated the 11th of February 2025, a Republican congressman, Andrew Ogles, I think his name is, Tom Tiffany, Joe Wilson, and Don Bacon, said that South Africa had a vendetta against Israel and was allegedly committing human rights violations and was friendly with China's Communist Party. What they wrote to Trump was the following: "We urge you to revoke South Africa's preference benefits under the American Growth and Opportunity Act." This letter, which was signed by those 4 congressmen, said, "We would also suggest that you consider suspending diplomatic ties unless that government is prepared to engage constructively with our own." If South Africa loses this preferential access permanently, this will affect the agricultural sector, the farmers that Trump says he cares about. It will also affect the automotive sector, leading to losses in the tune of hundreds of thousands of jobs in the automotive sector as well as in the agricultural sector. Some farmers will lose their businesses if this goes through. And this is part of the balancing act in all of this. When it comes to the issue of refugees, it's important to put out the facts, to put out the legal definitions so that we don't have any confusion or distortion. The definition of a refugee under the 1951 Refugee Convention, a refugee is defined as a person who, owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, is outside their country of nationality and is unwilling or unable to avail themselves of its protection. Are Afrikaners refugees? Are they legitimate refugees by the legal definition? No, they are not. The very fact that you still have 2.7 million Afrikaners living and working in South Africa without any intention to leave as refugees in and of itself underlines and undermines the narrative that actually there's a refugee situation playing out in South Africa. Go and look at what is happening in Haiti. Go and look at what is happening in South Sudan, right? There are actual war zones in those countries. If you go and look at what is happening in the Sahel region, where jihadists have been terrorizing communities for years, where people have been displaced in the hundreds of thousands, you will see what is a real refugee. Let us not diminish or cheapen the definition, and let us not diminish or cheapen the reason why this legal instrument exists in the world right now. This comes from the period of World War II. People were fleeing real persecution with soldiers hunting them down. And it was understood that sometimes the global community has to provide measures for people who are seeking refuge to have that status and to be protected from the governments that are pursuing them. There's no government in South Africa that is pursuing anybody, and there's no racial pursuit of anybody, right? We need to be very clear that there's no race-based persecution of Afrikaners in South Africa. There's no government persecution. If you look at corporate South Africa, many people from many races are working well together. There are over 10.8 million people working in the formal sector in South Africa. That gives you an indication. All of those places, whether it's companies like Woolworth, companies like the mining companies, Anglo-American, banks, Investec, the big law firms, KPMG, Ernst & Young, the big consulting firms, Bain, what's the other one? Boston Consulting Group, all of these ones that are operational in South Africa, you'll find that they are multiracial in nature, and people are working and living well together. In suburbia, many people of different races are working and living well together. In private schools, you'll find multiracial classrooms with students of different races, with teachers of different races. The depiction of South Africa by Trump is false, it's misleading, and it's nowhere close to what is happening on the ground. In fact, many people don't see the divisions that Elon Musk is pushing for, etc. Right? Julius Malema does sing a song that nobody likes, but he's the leader of a 10% party. He's not a government official. He's not a minister. He's not in a position to make any orders to the police. He's not in a position to make any orders to the army. The idea that you can be a refugee refugee because of what a minority party leader says is one that is not founded in law. And it's one that actually also just exaggerates the impact of some of these historical struggle songs. At some point, Jacob Zuma was singing Haulethu Mshini Wami. He was calling for his machine gun. He would sing that song all over the place. People didn't like it. They complained about the song. It did not materialize in any political violence, in any violence on the ground. People can make a distinction between political songs, between historical songs. People understand the legal system. It is not necessarily true that even though these songs are offensive or they're disturbing, particularly if you're a white person, I can understand. If you're a white person listening to those songs, it would be deeply hurtful to listen to those songs. But let's be clear, there's a big gap between those historical songs being sang and a direct call or incitement for violence. This is why the courts have ruled in favor of the song being part of free speech. And a lot of people who are speaking about this haven't read the judgments, and they are simply making it seem as if the courts were irrational in making that decision. No, every country has a context. Every country has a history. When Tupac said or sang all of his songs about the police, very few people, if any, took it literally. Nobody went and started like, I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole because Tupac's lyrics are not advertiser friendly. But fundamentally, you get what I'm trying to say. There's so many songs out there that nobody acts out. Nobody acts out. Some people have listened to Eminem's songs. He used to hate his mother, for example, and they love their mothers. There's a big gap between a song and actual action. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I don't want to make this video longer than it needs to be, right? So we know that people are living cohesively in South Africa, in many parts of South Africa. We know, of course, that there are still issues around economic justice, which is the reason why the Expropriation Act exists in and of itself, right? In terms of crime in South Africa, there are high levels of crime in South Africa. If you look at this 2020 data that I'm about to show you on murders from the South African Police Service, you'll see that there's a problem. Here's the data. Before we discuss this data points further, we have to work with the available statistics. We cannot work on conjecture. We cannot work on anecdote. Those are not empirical standards of data evaluation. Ben Shapiro, who seems to now be breaking his own rule, likes to say facts don't care about your feelings. And we have the facts on the murder numbers in South Africa. We have the data on land ownership in South Africa. We have the data on the economic situation in South Africa. Here's what the murder stats say. The murder stats, before I talk about what they say, are some of the most accurate in South African statistics collection, because you just can't hide a dead body in the first instance. But secondly, there are multiple strictly followed regulations about dead bodies and how they are managed. South Africa is very strict on that. You can't just bury anyone. Everything has to be reported. Everything has to be documented. We're very good at that. And we were able, even during the COVID pandemic, to document how many people were passing away and from what conditions they were able to pass away from. Nobody challenged the data. Nobody challenged that data because it's quality data, right? These are not stats like stolen cell phones. These are not stats like, some instances where people steal your wallet or whatever, and you don't even bother reporting because you know that those perpetrators are not likely to be caught. These statistics are highly regulated and very high quality statistics. We just need to be clear about that. There's no alternative source of South African statistics other than Statistics South Africa. And it is used by academics, it is used by media, it is used by international media. It is valid data. People are trying to undermine the data on the extreme right because it doesn't prove what they want it to say. It simply doesn't. Here are the numbers. In 2020, there were 21,325 murders in South Africa, but there were only 49 on commercial farms. Understand that people who live on farms are over 1 million because of the farm workers and their family members. In the last quarter, there were 930,000 farm workers in South Africa, according to Statistics South Africa labor data, the quarterly labor force survey. You can find that online. It's accessible. And I'm going to show it to you here. There it is. So when you consider this data and you see that the murder statistics don't indicate any genocide, don't indicate any murder based on race, they don't indicate that. They do indicate that South Africa has a large crime problem. It becomes clear that there's no refugee crisis in South Africa for one particular race of South Africans. Going further, economically, in January of 2025, Statistics South Africa released the 2022-23 Economic Expenditure Survey, and this data indicated the income and expenditure of various households based overall, but also based on race. The data indicated that there are still large patterns of income inequality in South Africa. Here's the data. Here's what it says. White-headed households had significantly higher income and consumption expenditure versus other groups. White-headed households had significantly higher median income and expenditure versus other population groups. On average, white-headed households earned the highest income of 676,375 per annum, followed by Indian and Asian-headed households at 417,431, followed by colored-headed households at 260,816, and finally, Black African-headed households at 142,632. So that's average, but median is a better statistic where you have, disparities because of people maybe earning a whole lot of money and others earning less. So what is the median income? The median income of white-headed households was 472,788. The median income of black-headed households was 81,290. So you can see it's almost a multiple of 6. Almost a multiple of 6 in the case of the median income. Proves very clearly that in terms of wealth, in terms of prosperity, in terms of quality of life, white South Africans are living much better lives than the rest of South Africa, and they are not refugees, but they are actually the economic elites of South Africa. It's not me saying that. It's the data saying that. And the facts don't care about our feelings. Jay-Z once said, the numbers don't lie. Check the scoreboard. And I invite us all to keep checking the scoreboard so that we are grounded in empirical reality as opposed to conjecture, as opposed to narrative, right? So now that we've spoken about the facts, we have to acknowledge that despite the facts, despite these facts, Mr. Ramaphosa is going to be facing a hard time in that meeting with Trump. And this is based on how the meeting with Zelenskyy went. The meeting with Zelenskyy went left. I think Zelenskyy made a lot of mistakes in that meeting. I think he made so many mistakes. He was cutting Trump. He didn't understand some of the metaphors. He was being abrasive. All of those things were not helpful to his cause because he depends on America for a lot of support. That's not to say you shouldn't fight for your cause. You have to be strategic. In a negotiation, you have to know who you're negotiating with, who you're dealing with. That's going to be the challenge for Mr. Ramaphosa as well, right? But we've seen that other meetings outside of the Zelenskyy one have gone very well. If you look at the meeting with the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, him and Trump actually got along well. They've been able to sign trade deals as a result of positive meetings. So Trump can have a good meeting with you or a bad meeting with you. The thing is that you don't know which one of those two you're going to get. Obviously, you do your best and it affects, or there's a bearing on your participation in that particular meeting, because if you push Trump, he'll push back. He'll push back hard, right? And he doesn't like to lose face, especially in front of the media, because he has an ego that does need to be managed, right? Those are the realities. But on the positive side, Mr. Ramaphosa knows how to turn on the charm. He knows how to play the game, and that is going to be something that will be an attribute for him. But it's very clear that this is going to be one of his most important tests in terms of his individual political talents, his negotiating talents, as he goes into this one-on-one with Donald Trump. It's just going to be him and Trump. And he has to be able to pull it off because there's a lot on the line. The good news is that Trump is looking for a deal. He wants to be viewed as a deal maker. And South Africa is not his real opponent. His real opponent is China. That's his opponent. And he has been briefed that China is dominating in Africa. China has more positive perceptions than the United States of America does right now in status quo. So if he treats Mr. Ramaphosa poorly, if they have maybe a Zelenskyy moment where in the White House, in the glare of all of those cameras, he then attacks Ramaphosa, they tell him, you don't have the cards, etc., etc. And you have Vance there saying, no, when you're being disrespectful, all of those things. It will be seen by African leaders who will say, China didn't treat us like that. Europe didn't treat us like that. So effectively, we don't have a relationship that can work with the Americans. And they will go deeper into the hands of China, into the hands of Russia. There will be BYD cars in Africa. There will be Huawei phones in Africa. We will be using Chinese satellite technology in Africa. And by the way, there's something called the demographic dividend. Everyone acts like Africa doesn't matter. Africa has the minerals. And by 2050, Africa will have the largest population in the world. We will be the biggest market. Everyone will be trying to sell to us. So if America messes up now, the clock of history will keep ticking. In 25 years, in 2050, when Africa has over 2 billion people, who will they be selling to? Right? We're not always, and this is the deception that I want you guys to understand. We don't have to keep being poor as Africans, and we're not necessarily going to remain poor. This is a result of failed leadership. But failed leadership can be changed. These dynamics can change. We're not always going to be poor. So if Africa gets our act right, and I think we will, by 2050, are you going to be on the right side of Africa or on the wrong side of Africa? You may think it's far-fetched, but in 1980, some people didn't think China would be in the position that it's in right now. And it obviously is. This is not our fate for all eternity. And we shouldn't think it is. So Trump knows that. Or he should know that. We'll see. We'll see. Or people are aware of that in any case, which is why they're trying to maintain and manage relationships with Africa. It's called the demographic dividend. So as things stand, the stage is set. The stakes are high. Stage is set, stakes are high. Trump is meeting Ramaphosa. What do you think will happen? Let's talk in the comments. I'm going to be following the story like a hawk. Look out for more videos on this. It's going down. It's going down.